Hello and welcome back to our series of interviews with Euros members around the world. It's a huge pleasure to welcome back Dima Lorenz at Dwellworks China. Dima, you were one of the first people that I spoke to. It's great to see you again. Tell me, how have things moved on for you since we last spoke?
Yeah, well, hello, Dom, and first of all, thank you very much for having me back, and congratulations on this entire video series. It's been really great to see how the rest of the members, what they're going through, how they've reacted. So thank you very much for putting all of this information out there. It's been really interesting. Now on a China and Hong Kong front, yeah, we've been making some really good progress, I must say, and very happy about the current state overall. We've seen for the last 4 or 5 weeks a sort of gradual but continuing reopening in both markets. For China, we still have a number of social distancing measures in place, and masks are completely are everywhere and continuously. But we do have we've got a lot more access now to delivering our services as normal. So we've got access to the compounds. The schools are reopening or have already reopened in phases. Bars, restaurants are normally open. Public spaces, parks, zoos, you name it, have sort of resumed services, not necessarily exactly as before, but with a new degree of normal. This allows us to actually deliver services pretty close to where we were before. For Hong Kong, it's the same thing. It's been, I mean, the situation overall had been, I must say, very well maintained here in Hong Kong over the last weeks. The schools are reopening, so local schools will reopen a little bit later, and the international schools have already reopened partially. In fact, my eldest daughter actually went for her first day of schooling today after 4 months of homeschooling. So I could not be in a happier mood. The other one is going to join in next week. So they're taking this sort of staged approach with letting children back. But again, it's under social distancing norms. So they as well have to wear a mask all day from 9 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Social distancing is observed within the classroom, so they have the desks are about 1.5 meters away, and I still have to figure out what they did for the lunch break. So I'll get an update on that tonight. But on the other side, on sort of access to properties, real estate, that's all been pretty much normal now in Hong Kong for the last weeks already. We're also seeing a continuous reopening of the sort of general public space, and essentially up to 8 people can now meet at any point in time here in Hong Kong, which is great. Now there's to this, and then this is a pretty enormous part for our industry, and that's that the borders to mainland China as well as to Hong Kong are still essentially closed for China for non-nationals. So even if you are a foreigner with a resident permit in China, you're currently not allowed to enter. And then for Hong Kong, it's for anybody who doesn't have a resident permit is not able to enter, and that is obviously crippling for the main part of the business. I mean, we continue to provide services, but a lot of that is for domestic inter-China moves and for Chinese who had already entered just before the arrival ban came into place I think it's about now 5 weeks ago. So we're eagerly awaiting the reopening of the borders, because essentially that is what it will now take for us to come back to business as normal, or the new normal, if you like.
That's really interesting on so many levels. I'm thrilled that the schools are back. That's a huge normalization for everybody, for you, for your life, for the kids themselves. They must be thrilled.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, so borders within China, so between Hong Kong and China, are flights running? Can people travel between the two?
No, there's some exceptions on the Hong Kong mainland China border, so particularly allowing for commerce to travel back and forth, supply of goods and so forth. There are more exceptions on that front. Domestically within China, local mobility is pretty much back to normal. We had a national holiday on 1st of May, which just beforehand social distancing measures were eased again. And during that May period, we've already seen a lot more domestic flights within China for local tourism. So the Chinese government is obviously doing what it can to try to stimulate a sense of normality and encourage also local mobility between the cities. And that's so that is a very encouraging sign. It's a very straightforward thought that, you know, within China and Hong Kong, the spread of the virus seems to be contained. And essentially any new cases were only by people who are coming in from abroad. So by cutting that off, you keep the situation at bay, but obviously not a long-term solution. They need to get out of that space as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking to a few people who said a similar thing. Anna Cavell in Sydney, their borders remain absolutely sealed as well. But they're now talking about having like an agreement with us between Australia and
New Zealand.
Yeah,
yep.
Which is fascinating. And then I
think I wouldn't be surprised if we get the same one with other countries that have gone through the same process. So it becomes sort of a sort of easing of restrictions between several countries. But again, there's a lot of speculation behind all of that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, certainly from the point of view of, you know, your colleagues within Dwellworks in Europe and the US, there's a lot of, I was just talking with Steve Krein in Canada at CRC, and he was saying they are going to keep the Canada-US border shut until the 21st of June at the earliest. And, you know, this all makes perfect sense. But I mean, is there a sense of, you know, in Hong Kong, how is the kind of mood of people? Are people feeling more optimistic now?
Yes, I would say so. Yes, for both China and Hong Kong. I mean, for China, it's obviously always a little bit difficult to read the mood of 1.3 billion. But there is overall a general consensus and a general sense of relief, obviously, of having gone through a very difficult phase, which is now also combined a little bit with still a certain amount of fear that a second wave would still come. So there is a certain amount of disbelief, I must say, in terms of how measures are being implemented in other countries, and a sort of wondering of why not the same measures that were used for China are not more rigorously enforced in other locations. Now, obviously, I personally think the measures that China put into place worked very well in China, because China is China, and there's a cultural component as well as a political component. And from a cultural perspective, China is a lot more we-centered versus I-centered, and with that is a lot more for the general common good to essentially ensure that everybody follows the same guideline. And then on top of that, there is obviously the political system that if the government tells you to wear a mask, you do wear a mask. But it seems that those measures worked very effectively in China, and because they were also very rigorously enforced. And then there's sort of the wondering from many people within China and Hong Kong of why other countries are not following exactly the same way. And then even further disbelief of why some countries are protesting against measures that have to be taken. Again, that is from their perspective, and they're seeing it very much from what has happened in their own market. But overall, there is certainly, first and foremost, a big sense of relief that we've gone through a very difficult patch, and that we're now slowly coming out on the other side.
It's fascinating, and we're actually about to run some research. I think I mentioned, I might not have done it, with Sabine Bayerlocker, who's our primary cultural trainer, and just looking at two things: risk management, how this risk has been managed in different places, and also the cultural imperatives that sit within culture. So obviously, as you said, China, Asia are very cooperative cultures. They're not individualistic cultures. And I can imagine the disbelief that, you can see people out on the streets. To be fair, that disbelief is also prevalent in Europe and the US as well.
It makes a phenomenal case study. I mean, really, it's on a cross-cultural perspective. There's so much content here of how nations, of how countries and cultures have reacted to this crisis, and yeah, it's going to be fascinating to investigate and review in the future.
Yeah, well, it really. I mean, we're going to be talking about this for decades, which is probably far too long.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
I know, right? So your teams must be, very pleased to have, some level of work back. And are you
Yeah.
now able to? So you're all back centralized in your offices, or are people still
Yep.
working from home? You are great.
No, we're all fully back in the offices. I mean, I haven't been able to go back to China still because I can't enter right now. But within the offices in Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, back very much to a sense of normal. Again, masks are worn a lot, but it's within mainland China. But aside from that, we are able to deliver services as good as normal.
That's great.
And it's also, I think we've had sort of a sense of a recovery from the exhaustion or from the emotional strain from about a month ago. And I can feel for anybody who's currently going through this very difficult and dark patch. And there is so much worry and taxing anxiety for everybody, whether it's from working from home, the health fear itself, homeschooling, you name it. I mean, all of that is obviously lying on everybody's mind. And we've sort of seen already in the last weeks a little bit of a recovery from that, a sense of optimism and positivity within the team and within the office, and we're obviously trying to support that wherever we can. So yeah, hopefully it's again that other markets can see that there is a recovery phase that goes after the most difficult stretch, and I don't know how long that recovery lasts, but we're definitely seeing more of a positive cohesiveness within the team already.
I'm so pleased to hear that. That's really good, because again, and thank you for saying that, because I think for a lot of people we're still in lockdown, and it seems like this is never ending, but we know it is. I mean, in most places now they are phasing in deadlines, and this is one of the most important things, I think, for just that base. It's a bit like, it's a lot more than, but it's a bit like, you're sitting in an airport and nobody gives you information about the delay to your flight. You get very frustrated about it.
That's actually a great example, yeah.
So listen, in terms of, I just wanted to ask more about social distancing, because you said things like restaurants are open. I mean, what about public transport? Is that functioning at a similar level or not yet?
Yes, it is, and it's again, masks are mandatory. There is a temperature check when you go into the subway. People are enforcing sort of social distancing wherever they can. But obviously very difficult if you've ever been in sort of Shanghai, Beijing rush hour. Traffic jams are back, so that's I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but Beijing is currently considering, in fact they may have already implemented they've got a regulation of how many cars are allowed each day, and they regulate that with your license plate number.
Yeah.
So we're coming back to some of the normality that China had before, and you sort of find compromises within the official social distancing norms and what you have to do in order to get to work. So it's been a lot of very interesting stories from the team on some of their journeys, I have to say.
I can imagine. And going back to the thing about deadlines, do you have any indication from your Hong Kong government or the central Chinese government about when basically aviation internally will start again, or not yet?
No, I mean, aviation within China has already commenced, but the entering of China, that's obviously still blocked. I know there is the official notification that discussions have commenced about when a reopening should take place, but no actual dates are anyhow available. What's been interesting, and I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to see continuing, when the Immigration Bureau issued the regulations on this arrival ban, they left a little loophole in there that essentially said that emergency economic situation could still be addressed by assignees coming by foreigners coming into the market. And so there was a little bit of that loophole. And we've seen now within the last 2 or 3 weeks, an increasing amount of exceptions. Not on a massive scale, but we have had clients who have actually approached us saying, okay, this assignment is now confirmed. Mr. Smith will arrive at that point. Usually this was, I must say, was for companies who are fairly large in size, who are very prominent within their geographical area or a particular city, and or for positions that had a very vital role. And we've received a lot of questions because of that, and basically saying how is this managed? And essentially it works through an application within China by the company to the local district bureau to apply for an exception. There is that possibility, but it's really it is a rare phenomenon. But I think what we may be able to see is over the next weeks to come, rather than a full out opening, is seeing more exceptions being granted. And with that sort of getting a slow reopening going. But again, it's a unfortunate thing with China. All of that is pure speculation until the moment it's officially announced. So, but we're obviously all very eagerly anticipating on when any news and when any update is going to come through.
And to be fair, that's not just unique to China. That would be exactly the same in the UK. We don't know anything about what's going on until the government tell us. I mean, a good example of that was last week, and we've actually, I've arranged to do a legal liability interview with Martina and Gordon and Alistair Murray, DSP here, because Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, the government suddenly announced that real estate could function again from 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. And then of course these assignees who are in temporary accommodation are all on the phone to every DSP around London saying, we go see properties now? And of course, the DSPs are saying, we need our processes to be absolutely watertight before we start with that. Whereas, of course, the real estate companies aren't acting with quite the same level of caution. So, you know, this is not unique to China. In terms of the way that the business community in China is responding to this, I know that there have been limited, you know, China is not a country with you know, large social nets. In terms of the business community, has there been any governmental support, tax breaks, any ongoing financial support?
There has been, there are various systems in place that essentially the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government have put forward in order to essentially ease some of the problems for some companies. Now, for China, many of these efforts are not necessarily aimed at support on a salary level, but they are more aimed at easing cash flow problems from companies. So was delay of tax payments, social benefits payment delay, return of any outstanding pre-tax payments. So rather than giving an actual support for salary functions or for employees, it was more of a let's keep the companies going. With that together, a lot more of a leniency from the banks to provide loans, business loans to companies, and to keep these enterprises in business for as long as possible. A lot of that applied on a local level to local Chinese companies, but there were also some benefits or some access that foreign-owned entities were able to take advantage of. For Hong Kong, it was a step further. There is a subsidy system that helps companies support their salary payments as long as they are not making any redundancies during that period, which I think is fairly similar to some of the measures we've seen in Europe. So a little bit of a mix of both, but I think it's been overall a focus really of let's make sure that businesses stay in place and not just the large, big government state businesses. Well, they can't really go that easily bankrupt anyway, but also a lot of the smaller businesses, the SMEs that have been supported. So that's been good to see.
That's good to know. I mean, that is good to know, and that's progressive. And I think what's so interesting is how, you know, China, Hong Kong, you know, has balanced very carefully risk against the existential fear of us never getting back to normal. And I think that's something that is, you know, the world is looking at now.
I mean, I fully agree. At the same time, we got to bear in mind, China is going through a very difficult economic situation as well. And they obviously are trying each and every measure to make sure that the economy keeps going. And it's obviously for them, particularly the topic of reopening and really re-entering the global space is absolutely fundamental. So hopefully that will have also an impact on our on our transferees and their ability to return back to these parts of the world fairly soon.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And again, we were just, I said to you before the call, I was on a call yesterday and we were talking about, you know, potential shifts in relocation policy and what that's going to look like. And, you know, whether or not, you know, corporations are going to have to, I think, rely much more on the partnerships that they have with people like you to give, you know, the reassurance that assignees are going to need in what has, you know, what will still be a slightly uncertain time going forward. So I think, you know, DSPs have a great service to provide right now.
I fully agree. I mean, it's going to be something, you know, the assignment policies themselves may change and the length of stay, but I think the support, particular for more challenging situation, and China is one of them, but there's hundreds of other countries that are still deemed difficult for assignment, and for those ones, I think that's where a lot of companies will indeed lean out more on the DSPs in order to make sure that assignments are safe, that assignees are properly briefed on their situation and their medical plans and their option on the ground should situations like this happen again. So yeah, it's there is in all of this. In all of these difficulties, there is certainly also some opportunity, and hopefully we'll come out of this with new projects to work on at the end of the day.
And I hope as well, I mean, more recognition for you know, the really important role that our industry's played. And, you know, so many people that I've talked to over this crisis have said, you know, okay, they have been so busy. Okay, it hasn't been invoiceable work, but there has been so much work in supporting assignees, even to the point of helping to get their groceries if they don't want to go out. You know, just the kindness that people have shown across the industry.
It's I mean, we had to all answer a whole different set of questions that we never answered before, and that we had to look into. But it's been the rewarding part. I mean, if you can help somebody, whether an individual or a company in this time of a crisis, then that's obviously really a relationship builder for the future.
Definitely. Dima, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you so much. I'd love to do this again, sort of as we approach the end of June and see where we are. It's really great to have this continuity of seeing things, you know, move on. So thank you so much for taking the time.
No, with absolute pleasure, anytime. And hopefully by next time I can tell you how the borders reopen and how we're handling the first influx of assignees. So exactly. Fingers crossed for that. And in the meantime, again, thank you very much, A, for having me and B, for conducting these interviews. I think they're super helpful. So much appreciation to you as always.
That's so nice of you to say. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. And we'll catch up again in 5-6 weeks.
Super. Thank you very much.
Enjoy your newfound freedom. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.